Welcome back to another video where I break down movies and TV shows to reveal the universal storytelling structure beneath it all. My name is Schlegel and this is 29 Beats to a Story. Today we're breaking down the Iron Giant scene by scene. But yesterday, maybe I exposed your favorite movie. Check out the videos tab for the complete rundown. The Iron Giant was directed by Brad Bird and stars Vin Diesel, Jennifer Aniston, and Shooter McGavin himself, Christopher McDonald. And the titular character apparently only speaks 53 words. Yeah, I didn't know much about this movie going into it. Somehow, over the past 27 years, I haven't caught this one time. I mean, I knew that the movie had a dedicated and beloved fan base, so I was expecting some magic here. What I was not expecting was to get choked up and teary-eyed over a Vin Diesel voice performance. 53 words. The fan base totally undersold this movie. And somehow I avoided that spoiler ending since my freshman year in high school. But it landed the emotional gut punch with immaculate precision. IMDb gives this movie 8.1 stars out of 10, and Rotten Tomatoes gives it a 96%. I, however, give it 26 out of 29 schmooples. I just wish the first act had been a little bit longer so that we could witness and experience Hogarth's isolation, his social isolation, the emotional core of the movie, if you will. But hey, you're not here for my review, so let's get down to the breakdown. We start, as always, with a focus on our protagonist, specifically their situation, their personality, and their inner conflict. The situation is the Iron Giant crash landing on Earth from a remote corner of the universe. It wreaks havoc just by existing, it would seem, and the only witness is a nearly drowned ship captain. It's poised to enter the life of Hogarth, our protagonist. His personality is the typical precocious child raised by a working-class mother. His inner conflict is a need for friendship that also conflicts with his understanding of consequences. In this case, he adopts wild animals to the dismay of his mother. Next, we examine where, why, and how our protagonists exist in their world, with a focus on why they do not quite fit in. Some of these details will directly relate to the climax in the third act. Hogarth's erratic behavior is contrasted against the entire diner of normies, sure, but Dean gets a specific focus. He's completely at odds with the conservative townsfolk himself, while his jazz cool cat persona opposes Hogarth. Or rather, it balances Hogarth since they momentarily team up as soon as they meet. The eyewitness to the Iron Giant's landing is contrasted against the general skepticism of the townspeople, who openly mock the person we know is speaking the truth. Then a brief event happens, one that's never happened before. It's destined to lead all the characters away from their status quo. Dean speaks out, cutting through the laughter to show his support for the Iron Giant story, the only one to do so. Which leads us to examine the effect of that something new to the status quo, specifically what's different now, and what remains the same. Dean admits the truth of his lie to Hogarth, claiming he was just sticking up for an outsider, which is the same as his unflappable acceptance of Hogarth's pet squirrel, but different because this is a grown-up conspiracy, not a child's pet. Dean's unquestioning support is tested when the squirrel climbs up his pant leg, which is the same as when he sticks up for the kook, but different because now the situation is personally affecting him. Annie calls home to inform her son that he's on his own for the evening, which is the same as Hogarth's precocious introduction, but different because we're seeing just how alone and supervised he routinely is. We move along to the discovery that things are less than ideal. or else we explore how badly things are. Both scenarios are common. Hogarth ignores his mother's orders and watches a scary movie anyway, which predictably puts him on edge. And that's a discovery for us that things are less than ideal without Annie home. He climbs onto the roof at night to check the TV antenna by himself, which is exploration of how bad things are. Then he discovers the top of the antenna missing, and a trail that leads away from the house, which is for him a discovery that things are less than ideal. Next, our characters dedicate their effort to a specified goal, and this is always narrower in scope than what the third act will demand. Hogarth sets out on a heroic campaign to face the threat of a Martian invasion. In the third act, he'll actually have to save the Martian from the military invasion, but there's one step in between that we'll get to later. Then we run through a brief checklist of the main story elements that we can expect during this journey. Hogarth's sense of purpose and motivation, massive governmental infrastructure and presence, a fish-out-of-water dynamic of the Iron Giant on Earth, Annie struggling as a single mother and making ends meet, the unintended destruction of the Iron Giant's simple existence, and Hogarth's inability to leave behind a defenseless creature. Which brings us to the brief event that launches our characters into the wild jungle of the second act. It's also called the oh shit moment. Hogarth uses all his might and shuts down the power station, freeing the Iron Giants from captivity. Oh shit. We follow our characters as they discover the new rules and expectations of their journey. These are always distinct to the narrative at play. The expectation of discretion is demonstrated when Hogarth accidentally wakes up the Iron Giant, and he immediately understands the level of danger he's in. The expectation that Hogarth must start acting more responsibly is shown when Annie finds her son in the woods, and she lays into him for disobeying her for childish antics and impulses. The rule that paranoid gossiping is linked to lethal consequences is suggested by the nuclear attack propaganda video playing in the background, while Hogarth argues against the rumors. Our expectation that Dean will explore this mystery deeper is given to us when it's revealed that Dean is a scrapyard owner picking up an oddly damaged tractor. Then the rule of discretion is enforced, not just the expectation anymore, but now the rule, when government agent Kent Mansley descends on the scene, and he immediately recognizes the national security dangers. Next, our characters showcase their ability to grow and progress, and this is always an external or physical beat. Hogarth returns to the forest, armed with knowledge that it eats metal to lure out the Martian invader for a photo. The Iron Giant makes peaceful contact, offering the same corrugated treat back to Hogarth. It also reveals the shutoff switch from the power station, proving that it understands it was saved and that it can reason. Then our characters face legitimate and understandable reasons to deviate from their stated convictions, agendas, or desires. And it's not always a good thing for a character to pass this test. There's a language barrier between the two which Hogarth has success in bridging, but it only highlights how little is known about this robot, what it wants, and what it's capable of. Hogarth fails to learn his lesson about impulsiveness and declares the robot as his own, which we have already seen has led to so many animal incidences that Annie can barely cope. We endure the anxiety as our characters face an escalation of problems and complications. Hogarth accurately predicts how everyone will react to the Iron Giant. Kent is on the case, and he's already briefing the local government on the situation. Hogarth cannot stop the Iron Giant from following home, and it also destroys more infrastructure simply because it's hungry, which leads to a very intense train wreck. Next, our characters evolve internally or emotionally by using elements of the plot or story which they've gathered and learned so far. Whatever external or physical progress they make is a byproduct. Hogarth changes his mind when he sees the Iron Giant come back to life again, and decides to lead it back to his home to hide. His suspicions are immediately confirmed when Kent speeds to the train wreck, then gets pointed straight to the Hughes home. Hogarth vamps during his dinner prayer, sending orders to the robotic hand fumbling around right behind his mother without alerting her. Then our journey-weary characters come to terms with their ongoing struggles. Moments and elements of the first act are revisited and used to gauge their overall progress. The hand is watching TV instead of what it was told to do, calling back to Hogarth doing the same to Annie's bedtime orders. He causes chaos to hide his new pet, calling back to when his pet caused all the chaos. Government involvement inches closer to the Iron Giant, calling back to the government and its political paranoia. Kent tells Hogarth to pretend he's a gangster, calling back to his comic book role-playing from before, and also to the identity crisis subplot of the large robot. Kent calls the general about the Iron Giant, calling back to the phone call from the eyewitness who was mocked and laughed at. The Hog Hug BB gun connects Hogarth to the Iron Giant, calling back to first contact at the power station. Hogarth uses the Dean maneuver to get himself out of a tight situation, calling back to Dean undoing his own pants in the diner. The sign in the window advertises the need for income, calling back to Annie struggling as a single mother. Hogarth connects with the Iron Giant over comic books, calling back to Hogarth using the comic books as motivation to seek out the Martian in the first place. He stops the Iron Giant from entering town, calling back to the conspiracy theories from the kids spoken in his class. Hogarth presents a whole rusty car to eat, calling back to why the Iron Giant was at the power station in the first place. Food. Which results in a brief event that strikes at our protagonist's core conflict. Dean tows away the car to his scrapyard, and the perfect habitat for the Iron Giant presents itself. We receive needed answers alongside our characters, which relate to both their external journeys and their internal conflicts. The external truth is explained that the scrapyard is the perfect hiding place for the Iron Giant, and Cool Cat Dean is the perfect partner in crime. So to speak. The internal truth is explained by Hogarth directly, that he's a gifted child who suffers from loneliness, and that's what compels him to take in pets and find that connection. There's also a secondary internal truth that Dean just blurts out, which is actually for the Iron Giant subplot. You are who you choose to be. Next, our characters complete their narrow scope objective, yet discover that their victory is shallow or altogether meaningless, and they must complete a wider scope objective. Hogarth convinces Dean to let the Iron Giant stay at the scrapyard temporarily, just long enough for him to figure out the logistics moving forward, which partly accomplishes the goal of resolving the Martian mystery. But now Hogarth must find a place on Earth for the Iron Giant to exist, if he wants to keep his new Martian best friend. Then our characters face an existential conflict that wounds their sense of self and identity or their physical journey. Ordeal begins when Kent rents the extra room and keeps a constant watch on Hogarth, complicating his arrangement with Dean, who is stressed out about the unsupervised robot. Death begins when Kent snaps and goes off on a tangent about national security. He fully intends on destroying the Iron Giant, and there's no other way for Hogarth to translate that. Rebirth begins when the laxatives finally kick in, giving Hogarth the opportunity to escape constant surveillance. And I just gotta say, of all the adult humor that gets sprinkled into these movies, calling explosive diarrhea a landslide, that's like Kevin McAllister who never ever got a hug. back into it. Our protagonist experiences an undeniable win, which is always related to the rebirth in some way. Thanks to Hogarth escaping Kent, he gets to see the Iron Giant assisting Dean with his art, proving the robot is capable of creation and beauty. And also, thanks to the persistent effects of the landslide, Hogarth and his new pet best friend spend the whole day playing as only a boy with his giant metal robot could do. Next, our characters suffer a grand loss, which is always connected to their newfound inability to quit their journey. Dean finally breaks the illusion, speaking out that moving the Iron Giant away from civilization would be safer. Kent's investigation circles in on the Iron Giant despite his backside setbacks, and then he finds Hogarth's camera. And okay, this robotic cannonball could actually go with the previous beat of belonging to the best day ever, but there's a significant amount of environmental damage done here. I honestly expected this detail to come back later as justification for the military's presence. Because, damn, that's a lot of displaced water, plant life, animal life, and natural habitat disruption. Yikes. Anyway, Kent develops photographic evidence of the Iron Giant. Then we experience a thematic freefall, as the main story elements are ramped up and thrown into upheaval. Anything can be revisited from any part of the story and used for chaos. The Iron Giant experiences death and mortality when a gun is used to kill a deer, which calls back to his constant fish-out-of-water dynamic while here on Earth. The Iron Giant wonders about his place in the universe, which calls back to not only his ongoing search for identity, but also extends out to where he actually did come from, where he actually does belong. Kent interrogates Hogarth in a scene that is hauntingly uncomfortable, which calls back to every breadcrumb along his investigation, and now the photographic evidence. He threatens to take Annie away from Hogarth, which calls back to his mother being a struggling mother, and also the fear of extreme government responses, which forces us into a brief event that robs our protagonist of seemingly any hope for success. Hogarth gives up the location of the Iron Giant, violating both the rule and expectation of discretion. We watch our characters realize that they cannot return to their first act selves, and so they turn to face again the wider scope objective. Kent calls in the military, and Hogarth must save the Iron Giant. He needs to sneak out of the house and alert Dean to the incoming threat, so he goes head-to-head with Kent. The military response is nullified by passing off the Iron Giant as scrap metal art. Dean's artistic side is shown a glimmer of hope when Annie softens to him despite his oddball antics in the diner. The Iron Giant chooses his own identity as Superman, officially rejecting childish roleplay and adopting a sense of self. Then he accidentally reveals his true nature as a weapon of destruction when faced with Hogarth's toy ray gun. And there's no forgetting that happened. Next, our characters use the major swings of the story and their personal journeys to move towards the climax. Anything can be revisited from any part of the story. The more elements used, the more satisfying the beat. Dean swoops in to help Hogarth, willingly this time, which calls back to his reluctance to house the giant in the scrapyard. Hogarth's classmates confirm the Iron Giant's existence, which calls back to their conspiracy theorizing in class. The Iron Giant plays the role of superhero when destruction almost hurts innocent people, which calls back to the destruction he has innocently caused and the villain he has appeared to be. Mansley finally proves his investigation with military witnesses, which obviously calls back to his investigation. The Iron Giant is now being much more assertive about himself, which calls back to his ongoing identity crisis. Then the military attacks, which calls back to every fear Hogarth has experienced. Kent calls for total and complete destruction, which calls back to his lying and manipulating and rapid descent into mania. The Iron Giant learns that he can fly, which calls back to his ever-growing range of discoveries about himself. It chooses not to act on its destructive nature, which calls back to his inability to control his impulses before. Then he appears to lose his only friend, Hogarth, which calls back to all the destruction he has caused simply by existing. And it calls back to the deer too, obviously. Then the final confrontation plays out between our protagonist and characters against the antagonistic force. The Iron Giant now enters full killer robot mode, now having lost everything it truly wanted to protect. Annie and Dean secure Hogarth and get him to safety, announcing that he's actually alive. And yeah, thanks for that, because I was speechless for a minute. The predictable military reaction ramps up to naval engagements, and Kent demands the situation escalate to the nuclear option. Literally, just like the propaganda we've seen and heard all movie long. Which culminates in a brief event where our protagonist finally, and oftentimes metaphorically, overcomes their place in the Act 1 status quo. Hogarth decides to prove his faith in the kookiness of the Iron Giant, siding with it the way Dean sided with the eyewitness in the diner. Here, Hogarth shoulders the weight of responsibility for his pets, or rather, his friend. We experience the direct aftermath of the climax. This can give our characters a moment to reflect on the situation, or else wind down the action with a coda. Hogarth reminds the Iron Giant of everything he taught him, and forces the robot to choose humanity over programming, which is winding down the action. Dean feeds the truth straight into the government's face about the Iron Giant's defensive nature, which is also winding down the action. Mansley realizes how majorly he screwed up, which is a brief reflection on the situation. Then the Iron Giant sacrifices himself to save Hogarth and everyone around him, which is the final bit of winding down the action. Next, we touch base with various important characters, typically to contrast them against their introductions or their previous status quo. The townspeople show their overall acceptance and love of the Iron Giant, contrasted against their fears at the beginning. Dean and Annie hook up, contrasting against both of their social isolation from earlier. Hogarth's classmates finally accept him, playfully beating on him now, which obviously contrasts against them beating him up for their own entertainment. And the general sends a parting gift from the government, which is all we get about Mansley's fate. I'm sure we can all assume he was let go, and all that it implies. Then we conclude with a tight focus on our protagonist, specifically to contrast them against how we met them at the opening. Hogarth's precocious personality and inner conflict are resolved as he chooses the mature route and lets a wild thing be wild. The situation is bookended by the Iron Giant reassembling somewhere remote, poised to enter Hogarth's life, contrasting against the Iron Giant landing on Earth from somewhere remote, poised to enter Hogarth's life. And there is my proof that the Iron Giant follows the same universal storytelling structure as all the others. The same 29 beats to a story. This movie made me understand why Vin Diesel being in the MCU was actually a cool thing. Because before, I just thought this was a really weird bit of celebrity casting that didn't make any sense. But now, I see that Groot is just the wooden form of the Iron Giant. And that's adorable. Don't look too closely into that analogy. It only works with rose-colored glasses. I thought it was weird for Vin Diesel to be in the MCU, but now it hits right in the feels. Also, as a legacy from this movie, every time I realize something that stops me just dead in my tracks, I go, Hog Hug! Because Christopher McDonald, his delivery is hilarious down to the syllable. So now I have Kent Mensley and Shooter McGavin lines just stuck in my head. So, what did you think? Did that ending bring a tear to your eye? Did a quote from this movie enter your everyday speech? Let me know your thoughts and comments down below. And now, if you'll excuse me, I've got another movie to go watch, and hopefully you'll find that interesting too. But until then, take care of yourselves out there, and I'll talk at you next time.